The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
And we are back to another edition of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but boy, do we have a really, really interesting show tonight. Genevieve, how you doing over there?
I'm doing quite all right. Definitely excited and intrigued about tonight. Tonight's
topic we've tackled before on this show, but I think tonight's going to be the first time that we're really going to go really deep into this particular topic. But before I continue any further, I just want to make a quick note that today is November 22nd, and a day much like today in 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Texas. That was 52 years ago today. It's just crazy how fast time flies. We had the chance to interview Jim Marrs, who wrote the book Crossfire, The Plot to Kill Kennedy, which was later used as one of the foundations for the popular Oliver Stone movie, JFK. And obviously there is a lot to be said about this particular conspiracy, who was involved, who did it, who pulled the trigger, and who stood to benefit. If you want to check out that interview, definitely go to our website, wotrradio.com, and just scroll through. You'll see there the wanted poster with JFK's picture on it. And that's our interview with Jim Marrs, where we talk all things JFK. One of the real fascinating conspiracies that caught a lot of people's attentions and still does so to this day. On a lighter note, I want to send a birthday shout out to a special little guy out there named Ace, who's turning 2 years old. I think he is officially 2 years old. He turns 2 years old tomorrow, West Coast time, but I think it's already tomorrow, today, where they're at. So shout out to them. Happy 2 years and many more. Have a blast. And shout out to Courtney and Ross, who are the parents of said charming young man. I hope that they're all doing great and having a good time and catching the show. All right. That being said, we're going to get things underway here because, as I mentioned, tonight's topic, it's mind control. We've talked to Ron Patton about this in the past, and we've discussed it on this show from time to time, and there's a lot to be said about this, but we got the chance to read one of the books that our guest tonight, Elisa E, has published. They're called Our Life Beyond MKUltra, and there's a book 1 and a book 2, and for our friends who are on Ustream right now watching, there you have the cover of the first book and the cover of the second book. I'm telling you that this topic is as multi-layered as some of the experiences and things that our guests had to go through. And Genevieve, I'm going to let you do an introduction for our guest tonight.
So we'll be talking to Elisa E tonight, author of A Life Beyond MKUltra books 1 and 2, and they tell the autobiographical story of Elisa's subjection to trauma-based mind control, intentionally designed by hybridized and cloned bloodline elites. The black tech, as it's called, that fragmented her mind was administered by an elite bloodline network of minions and perpetrators enslaved for centuries by malevolent beings. Her deep deprogramming, basically coming out of that state, began in 2008. Elisa is a preconception hybrid who became aware of her clones in the late 1980s. The current state of mind control technology now involves not only hybridization and cloning, but post-birth cybernization and the design of human-looking beings who are actually soulless. Now, the first book of Our Life Beyond MKUltra presents the horrendous programming and on tasks that ran through her early decades. The second book concentrates on the life-threatening journey from her time of escape to her years, committed to this deep programming. As far as we know, it's an ongoing process, and that's what we're here to talk to Elisa about tonight.
Yeah, and without further ado, let's welcome Elisa E to the show. Elisa, how are you? Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you great. Thanks for inviting me on.
No, it's our pleasure. Thank you in advance, because some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight is some pretty serious stuff. As I mentioned earlier, this is a topic that we have discussed in the past, but I believe that the level of detail that we'll get tonight from you and your experiences is something that I don't think we've really explored. And it's really difficult because where do you begin? It's such a complex situation. But why don't you give us just a brief overview for our listeners that maybe are not familiar with what MKUltra is, or maybe they heard the term, but they are not 100% sure what that means.
Okay. Well, MKUltra, officially, or I guess it is officially, it started back in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it started long before that. But it was a kind of an umbrella that covered numerous sub-projects of various versions of mind control or potential mind control research.
Mm-hmm.
There were the hearings in the 70s where a lot of information was leaked. They destroyed most of the documents and so forth from the programs, but some of it was left behind. And there was hearings, but nothing was done about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just put it that way. They claimed that it was shut down, and some people got slapped on the wrist, and that was pretty much it. But the ones that were truly behind it, the higher level people, nobody got touched.
Wow.
And the programs continued, and the sub-projects numbered in the hundreds.
Oh, wow.
Basically what happens is when something is leaked or revealed, or they know it's going to be leaked or revealed, they're already changing the name and, reclassifying it and taking it off the books. So that's really what happened with, the mind control research.
And what's interesting, and, the people that have read your book or have research into this, the word control is spelled in a very peculiar way with a K. What is the reason, for having a K as opposed to a C?
It's one of the many obsessions that I have that I can't actually explain.
Okay.
It's something that it's one word that I have to spell with a K. And I suspect, I can't, this is strictly an opinion on my part. Again, I'm dealing with a lot of alters, but I suspect that it has something to do with the German word control, spelled with a K.
Oh, wow.
But I'm not really sure.
Right. That's interesting. That's interesting.
I've tried. I mean, I can use a C, but when it's my work, I have to go back and change it to a K.
One of the things that you just mentioned is alters. What are alters?
Okay. Well, part of the result of trauma-based mind control, or even the objective, is to create alternate personalities. And I'm not talking about, alternate aspects or alter egos or, what we generally think of as the various parts of ourself. I'm talking about full-blown, compartmentalized, amnesic, other personalities that live within one body.
At the end of your book, there is quite a lengthy list of the alters that, what is the best word to say? They live inside you, or they inhabit your body. How do you see these alters?
They're different aspects of my mind, really. They're, or were, originally created and designed so separately that I had no knowledge that they existed except for what I would call bleed through or missing time, or the results of, perhaps things on my body that occurred while they were in control of the body. So they're different aspects of my mind that were fragmented off and then later programmed to become very particular personalities with certain characteristics and abilities and so forth, but very much segmented. So I did have bleed through, but I had no explanation of what these other memories were until I began, actually really waking up, and then once I began deprogramming, it became very evident what they were. And, for many people, you may look at some of those alters and think, well, I behave that way, or I have those characteristics. But for me, they would take over. It would be one part of me that would run the show until, the other parts of me came back.
We were watching a lecture online. It was somebody with extensive knowledge on mind control, and they were saying that the younger the individual is when they defragment their mind, the stronger it'll take hold. And apparently the ideal time, if I may use the word, to do this is the age of 5 and under. Is that correct? And if so, what time that your defragmenting and mind control began?
Well, first of all, let me qualify with this, and I wrote the books from this perspective as well. Mm-hmm. You would probably get a lot more detail from a programmer. Mm-hmm. I was never designed to be a programmer, so just so you and your audience understand, my perspective is from a victim/survivor who is gaining the information mm-hmm. first and foremost through her own alters, through what I call memory downloads, which went on for years, mm-hmm. And occasionally still happen. But now it's really more me receiving validation for a lot of the information that came forward, over my lifetime. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So really, from my perspective, it's from the experience of partial memories, full memories, mm-hmm. and then subsequent research, in more recent years. So just having said that, my first memory is pre-verbal, and I am clearly dissociating after, mm-hmm. and I couldn't breathe. And it was something that I know was intentional. So it was done, and then it was stopped, and then it was done, and the result, it was done several times. The result was, even as an infant, mm-hmm. Dissociating, kind of drifting off, mm-hmm. into another state of consciousness. So my understanding, I have several memories, very, very young memories, but my understanding now, having done the research and looked around and heard other people's stories as well, is that's what I'm told, that, if you start early enough and continue it ritually, mm-hmm. which is why it's ritual abuse, continue consecutively, the chances of recovery, meaning, if you stop at 5 and the mm-hmm. person is left alone, then the child will most likely not turn into multiplicity, or they can recover from it. So that's something I had to learn how to do as an adult. That makes sense.
No, yeah. I actually wanted to ask you about something that you mentioned. And, you talk about receiving these downloads and these programs that run inside you. And it sounds like the brain is treated like a computer. Is that pretty much how it is?
Yeah, it's a very good metaphor for it. It really is, because the programs, often I kind of discovered this. A lot of this I just discovered on my own. I didn't have the information when I began the downloads and so forth. I just recorded everything. A friend who had worked, let me just preface this, a friend who had worked with some others like me just said, just record everything, don't censor it. Mm-hmm. Write it down, record it however you can. So what happened is I began to see these patterns, and I began to name things because of the way it was. For example, loop. I started saying there were these loop programs that would just run and run and run and run.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And they're actually designed that way. It's setting it up in such a way that it is continuously running, particularly when I would go into a rest state. Mm-hmm. They would just loop over and over. And as I began waking up and deprogramming, I would wake up, basically, or it's probably more accurate to say I would come to during the course of it, right in the middle of it, and I would record whatever I saw, if it made sense or not. And over time, literally hundreds of bits and pieces were coming forward that didn't make sense to me, the mm-hmm. front person. And I would record them, and eventually these amazing patterns, and it was incredible what was coming forward. And then, years later, as I began to put mine all together, I mm-hmm. could kind of compare it to some other stories, and it was amazing that we were all basically, there's a lot of differences in individual programming, and your programmer is different than somebody else's, and so on and so forth. But basically, there was a lot of baseline similarities across the board.
And that's really interesting because this phenomenon is not just happening to you. One of the sections early in your book has a title, Childhood Aliens, and in it you describe an encounter with a ball of light in Tennessee that apparently this particular region had other total mind control victims as well as alien abductees. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and about this particular town in Tennessee? Can you tell us where it is and why do you think there's a concentration of alien abductees and mind control victims there?
Well, yeah, first of all, qualifying certain regions, what I began to see with this area, Tennessee, and other locations was I was always finding other so-called alien abductees or self-professed mind control victims that were reporting the similar towns or even the states. It seemed as though there were certain areas which I'll qualify that now. My opinion on that now is that there's programming centers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In these areas. And there's been a lot of information, various researchers have come forward and named locations where, several people have reported. So there's a definite pattern. It doesn't mean that it can't happen in any town, USA or elsewhere, but it seemed like as I became more and more lucid that there were other mind control victims and those claiming to be alien abductees that were reporting from the same zones. So that's kind of what I was getting at.
Oh, okay.
And as far as the orb experience in childhood, there could be several explanations for that. As I've, Frank, as I've gone on now and I'm starting to receive validation. People, I have a nice network of people that we share information, and I get a lot of emails and so forth. People that I know will send me information, and it's really interesting because there's the very paranormal aspect, but also a lot of information coming out about the technology that's being used, for mind control and for a variety of other uses through the military and intelligence communities. And the orbs show up in both of those areas. So, whether that was a being of light or whether that was technology being utilized at that point, I really can't say.
Right.
I have a quick question. From your own knowledge or belief, how widespread is this phenomenon in terms of, does it span across the globe and all countries, or is it kind of centralized in the USA?
That's a great question, and I'll, respond with, this is my opinion. I don't have any documents to back this up, but based on my experiences and some of my travels while I was under mind control and having handlers in other locations, meaning other countries, as well as subsequent research, it's definitely global. However, I would say that it was the stronghold, and I know there's varying opinions on this, but I would say the stronghold, at least at one time, if not still, is the U.S., and that even abroad, what I've noticed when I've listened to other victims come forward with their stories, many of them will say there's almost always a military or intelligence presence from the U.S.
Oh, wow.
So they may be in a facility in the U.K., but they'll say something along the lines of, but there was an American there with an American accent.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So I do believe that the U.S. is funding and is a lot of the U.S. bases are also being used. Not that the U.S. is the sole perpetrator by any means. So I think there's an allegiance with certain other countries' military and intelligence and elite and corporate, there's a, kind of a, what's the term? They're helping each other out at times, and backing each other. And of course, in my opinion, just to throw this out there, I really think the idea of nation is long gone. National boundary. To me, there's a corporate presence, and it's global.
Wow.
So behind this, the military, the intelligence, it's all corporate.
Right.
Even military at this point, So it crosses borders. Yes.
Let me backtrack just for one quick minute to the issue of UFOs and aliens, because this is what I found really interesting. And if I may preface this, and I apologize to our listeners that probably have heard this story a million times, but one of the eye-opening moments for me was way back in the early days of the internet. I came across an article by whom I later would find out and have the pleasure of meeting, Ron Patton, titled "Demons and Aliens Cloaking." And I thought it was a really interesting article, and it stayed with me for years until, fast forward, over 10 years later, I was able to track down the article and the author, and that's how my friendship with Ron began. In your book, when you talk about alien abductions, there's screen memories that are installed in people. So basically, some people are experiencing what they think are alien abductions, but that's not the case. There is something else going on, and this memory is implanted so that they don't know what actually happened. Can you tell me a little bit about that phenomena?
Sure. And again, I'll try to come from the perspective of my experience. I don't want to generalize and say that anyone claiming to have a so-called alien abduction is experiencing what I am. But what I can say is that for many, many years in youth, and then even into adult years, while I was still under, now reminding you, I'm still under full programming at that point, even though things are, throughout my life bleeding through, as I call it. In other words, something doesn't jive. I have a memory, or I have, I wake up in the morning with whatever, and then I have a memory. And often I had memories of these alien beings, or going outside and in the middle of the night, just getting up in almost trance-like and walking outside and waiting, and then having a memory of later having a memory of these beings abducting me. And in my case, as I began my deep deprogramming, I began to discover that there were inconsistencies in my so-called alien abduction scenarios. For example, I used to go to try to get help first off before I began this was before I began deep deprogramming, but I knew something was wrong. I knew at this point that I had these alien memories, but I also had military memories, being on bases and seeing men in uniform and so forth. So there was this real mix. And back then, this was in the 90s at some point, it was really taboo to go to UFO circles. It's not that way anymore, but I would try to talk about the military. And so I really couldn't explore that, so I continued to go looking for, answers in the UFO community. But I began to see these inconsistencies, and then I began to see that some of my childhood memories were from a child's mind. I didn't have the analytical capacity as much as I did as an adult. And so there were these things that showed up, and then I began to, look a little further, and I found that other people were reporting this crossover between alien and, military or what have you, that there seemed to be this coexistence. And don't get me wrong, okay? There are definitely otherworldly beings. That is not even a question to me. But the beings that I deal with are what I would call interdimensional, and I would classify more along the lines of malevolent, or, as people say, demonic.
Right.
So they're there's a wide variety of beings, and I do believe that the Greys fit into this, and what people refer to as reptilians, and so on and so forth. But I don't see them in the classical sense of ufology, where I started, looking for answers. What I understand is I've been mind controlled since the beginning. And so these beings are a part of mind control.
Wow.
I was, utilized in very specific ways through human agencies as well as, being utilized by the entities themselves. So to me, it's just a very different perspective based on my life experience. So I can't speak for anyone else's experience, but I'm leery when someone believes that it's, something traveling from another star system, and that's all there is to it. That right there, throws a red flag. I would ask more questions, beyond that point.
Mm-hmm.
And something that you said is that individuals who are under total mind control, they're not aware that they're possessed by these entities, these aliens or demons, as you call them. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I wasn't, even though I was having, as I said, childhood, adolescent, teen, adult bleed through. I mean, there was always episodes where these moments of as if what I call now my higher self was, kind of stepping in for just a moment. And it was like, wait a minute, right in the middle of something, but then that was gone. So what I would say is, it's really hard to emphasize this enough, but when you are completely under, meaning when your programming is running full tilt, you're being handled and reinforced constantly, and there's really nothing else. This is the world you're living in. No, you're not going to know. You're running forward, and that's all there is what's going on. And if something blips in, you're, in those moments of clarity or a lucid moment or a benevolence moment, as I would call it, it's quickly overridden by either your handlers, your programmers, or what's already installed. I mean, I actually had my own alters that would take over to wipe that out.
Oh, wow.
Because for them, their programming was, that's all they knew. Their survival depended on me staying programmed. So it's really an insidious thing. And then, of course, there's a lot of deception from the entities themselves. Most people, I think, when they think of malevolent entities, I think it's a natural inclination to think that it's always going to be dark and mean and hard, and they're all that. But when they want to be, and even more so, they're seductive, charismatic. I'm talking about some of the higher level beings. They're extremely powerful. I wouldn't say more powerful than the human soul, not by any means, but once you've been bombarded and ritualized for so long, there's a real draw to stay there. It's what you know. So even when those moments arise, there's something or 10 somethings there ready to take over to make sure that doesn't take.
Would you be able to elaborate for the listeners on, this idea of benevolence and how it ties into your deep deprogramming? Okay.
Well, throughout my life, not a lot of times that I recall consciously, but there were these moments. This is where it kind of starts for me, where I was in the depth of it. I mean, the darkness, the life, expecting to die anytime, but not sure why I felt that way. Not able to think clearly, but living as though I was going to die any moment, and then wanting to. So throughout that, there were these very, very rare but incredibly deep and powerful moments where it's as though body, mind, and soul, for a very brief period, I was filled with what I would call life, just true, pure life. And then it was gone. It as though it rushed through me, and then it had passed, which was devastating, the passing of it.
Yeah.
But it was, I believe, for lack of a better understanding at this time, grace. I know that I have a very, very strong spirit, very strong soul, human soul, and I don't know what the relationship was there, but there was something that kept me going. And even when I began waking up, before I began what I call deep deprogramming, I really had nowhere to go, but I kept looking, and I just had this really, really strong internal knowing that kept saying, just keep hanging on. Someone's going to know what you're talking about. You're not crazy, just hang on. And, you know, I went on for 12, 15 years like that. I mean, consciously knowing that these memories were real, that someone was going to be able to help me. And eventually I met some people, 2 men, who did know what I was talking about. They just listened to me for a couple of days, and that was an extremely pivotal moment. That was in 2008. And when I heard the words, not only do we believe you, but we've worked with people like you, it was as though the floodgates just all started to burst open.
Of course.
I was kind of safe for the first time. And what I would realize a year later was my altars were starting to feel safe for the first time, that somebody was going to listen.
Wow.
And when I began that process, one of the men really stuck with me. It was long distance, but he just kept telling me, you know, just hang on, it's going to change, I promise, and just focus on all goodness. And, you know, I couldn't think. I mean, I really couldn't think. I was being bombarded 24 hours a day. My own memories, my own altars. It's something they call flooding. And I used the term, and I found out later that it actually does happen. I was being flooded with altar memories in an attempt to destroy me.
Wow.
You know, like, you can't handle it. If all this stuff, this horrific stuff comes back at once, you'll perish. And I didn't. And I just kept hanging on, and I kept asking to understand, you know, what that goodness was. And eventually there came this very, very real, very conscious, I can't express that quite enough. It becomes a conscious daily relationship with this, what I call benevolent, unconditional, creative love.
Wow.
And it became active. I mean, I actually began to change. I began to feel different. I began to feel stronger. I wasn't, as time went on, I wasn't being assaulted by my own altars or memories. I began to take authority through what I call this higher self, this beautiful, divine human soul. It's something that you can have a very conscious relationship with. And I see myself in a way somewhat separate from it still. It's a part of me. But I don't know if this is making sense. I still, you know, occasionally have fears, or I stumble, or I get tired and I get vulnerable. But this part is always there. It's always there, and it's very conscious for me. So I can turn to it and say, oh, yes, I remember. And that I believe that I know is why I'm here, why I'm continuing on, why I survive. And, you know, a lot of people don't survive. And I do think that it's not something virtuous for me. There's not I'm not better than someone else who didn't survive. It's that for whatever reason, there's grace, there's there's spirit strength, but there's grace. There's a lot of grace, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't recognize that.
That's really incredible. I know that there's a two-part question in the chat.
Yeah, well, essentially, KP was asking who was controlling you, and I presume, certain entities aside, in a physical sense, what corporations, organizations were these?
Well, I've never really, gone out publicly and spoken and given names. I will say this, not because I'm afraid to, but because they've been named over and over and over again, and I don't want to give any more energy to them. But what I will say in response to the person that asked is, if you want to go to the blog site, I don't know if you have that posted, but I have numerous collages, and I have several collages in which I have put their faces and their names.
Oh, wow.
And, and plenty of information. And I will name, in general terms, I will name for some people that want to know more of the human element. And it's probably a lot of things that you've already heard, but I think you understand a lot of us have shared in a lot of the same people, and even when it's not the same people, nothing ever changes. I mean, a lot of them have been named for decades.
Wow.
And they're still doing what they do. So, but in terms of organizations, institutions, and corporations, I can say, of course, CIA, FBI, DIA, NSA, Navy, Army, Air Force, factions of the Mormon Church,
groups, I believe,
Scientology, and then individuals who are what I would call Fortune 500s, who have contacts with a lot of these agencies and through their corporations. But if you really want to see some faces, go take a look at the collages. They're there.
And actually, for our listeners watching through Ustream, we're actually displaying the collages there. You'll see it changing every 10 seconds. No problem. No, these are they're quite telling. I mean, they're intriguing. Some of these are quite disturbing by the nature of them and some of the words and things like that. Was this part of the healing process?
Tremendous. I can't say this enough for any victims out there. What happened was this began in 2009, and I made a request of my altars to come forward and help me to develop these. And over a period of probably 5-6 months was the first batch, which was, 20 and I was absolutely stunned. I was cutting things out that I didn't have any idea what it was for. I was getting all these free magazines from the library and other sources, and I can't say enough for how therapeutic, but also what a catalyst it was for me personally, those of us that were attempting to deprogram, because a lot of my altars remained very secretive, and I promised them if they came forward and helped me make these that I would ask nothing of them, and if I wouldn't have anyone else ask who was who and what did they do, and it was just an absolute purge of information. And in some cases, there were very particular collages where it was me and one altar, and in one case it was a kill altar that is very, very dark, and I was stunned, when it was done that she and I worked together on this. So yes, it was amazing, and you'll see in the early ones they're not quite in order. A friend of mine helped me post them up, and a lot of the first ones there are from a lot of child altars, and it was incredibly healing. And I have them in a big scrapbook, in 2 big scrapbooks, and about every 6 months I pull it out and slowly go through it. And I'd say for at least 3 years, there's always something that I find that now I understand. that I didn't understand, prior. So I highly recommend it at a certain point in deprogramming that everyone engage in that process and invite your own alters to participate. It's extremely telling, and it's very, very healing in that, what you understand you can work with. What you don't know or don't understand, which this goes for everybody, there's really not much you can do about it, which is why we're all doing what we're doing, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Just a quick note, for anyone not in Ustream, where I did post the website address, for anyone else listening, it's ourlifebeyondmkultra.wordpress.com.
Elisa, before we take our top of the hour break, I wanted to ask you about something that you mentioned in your book, and it's another topic that fascinates me, and we've explored it at length here in past shows, and that's, you mentioned in your book the pineal gland and how it can be accessed through the nasal cavity, and it seems like this gland, it's almost like it blurs the line between reality and alternate reality of some sort. Can you tell me a little bit about how the pineal gland plays into the mind control ritual as you experienced it?
Okay. And again, strictly from my experience of it, I do have a memory as adolescent of, and this was in a so-called alien abduction, where, they went way up the nostril, and it was painful. And of course, at the time, I didn't, as a child, I didn't know why that was happening. It wouldn't be till many, many years later. But in addition to that, I really want to talk about the trauma and its relation to what you're talking about is the extreme trauma. Bottom line, we could even move beyond trauma. We're talking torture in a variety of ways, near-death experiences, a lot of different ways to bring that about. But it's my opinion that they're not necessarily doing that to create fantasy to program me with. It's my devout opinion, based on my use and even things that I can still experience in this state of consciousness, that they were attempting to access the ability in me to interact not only with these beings from these other dimensions, or if that's what they're even called, dimensions. I'm just using a word that I'm familiar with. But in other words, alternate realities. And that they wanted, my actual programmers and handlers and controllers wanted access to this. And that is why I was designed right from the get-go. And I don't believe by any means that I'm the only one that was being utilized in that way. I think that the trauma is a big part of it anyway, is to push, and that plays into the pineal. And I'm not an expert. I just know that that's the case. It plays into the ability to enhance all your senses and to access those that we don't normally access in our everyday consciousness.
Before we go, I got one more question before we take our break, and this was also in your book, and it's something that it reminded me a little bit. I don't know if you've heard of the case of, interestingly enough, Elisa, but this is Elisa Lam. It was a young Canadian student that she was found dead in a water tank here in a hotel in LA, in downtown LA. In your book, you mentioned that you have this recurring body memory of drowning, including being in a tank of water with a man above you telling you to stop holding your breath. And this is, I get chills just reading this, because the Elisa Lam case, I'm still intrigued by it, as many people are. And reading this, I couldn't help but think that there were some eerie parallels there. I'm not trying to say that this is what happened to Elisa Lam, but is this part of what you're talking about, these near-death experiences being used to control you? Yeah, in a way. And actually, in the case of the water, for me, in my personal experience, it was, I think there was another agenda going on also, which I talk about in book 1. And that's more, how do I say it? I think they were using it as trauma, but in those memories, I was in training. Okay.
So, and now it's something that I write about. I know you said you read, and it sounds insane. It sounds like it's something that, can't be, but I've never doubted that, what my altar showed me, which is a young altar, was capable of doing, but I couldn't explain how. And I just want to say that just within the last couple of weeks, a friend of mine sent me an email. She stays up on the technology that's just breaking. And they're, science and tech, that they're bringing out articles where they say, we've just discovered something, and in the next 10, 20 years, you're going to be able to do this. Well, there's things coming out that regard the ability to draw water into you and receive oxygen. And so the tank for me was that. I'm very clear that the tank when I was younger, and then there was another episode when I was in my teens in a much, much larger pool, which I suspect was a Navy facility. So I could never explain it, but again, the underground tech that I was being trained with is, any decent researcher would tell you probably a good minimum 50 years ahead.
Wow.
On black budgets. So there's information coming out now that's, to me, validating what my altar was saying she was doing. But couldn't explain how we could do that without the proper gear, as most people would think.
Right.
So.
Let me ask you one quick question before we go to break. This one's from the chat room. It's also from KP. He wants to know, at what point did you discover that you were a victim of MKUltra?
And I think it was also phrased slightly different later. He's trying to get at, at what point did you first become aware that something was actually wrong, different?
Well, that was a very long time ago. As I said, I had bleed through that there was something wrong. As far as understanding that I was a victim of mind control. And again, the MKUltra wasn't a word I knew until well into deep programming. But knowing that this is the way it was described, and I believe you read this in the book, by one of my altars. I was on a military base. I was going through electric shocks. I was strapped to a table. There were men in uniforms around me. It was a horrible night. I was 18, and at that point, I described it. I would describe it without knowing anything about mind control. I said they were going in my head, and they were putting things in my mind and taking things out. And I couldn't understand why. Again, the compartmentalization, the music altars, there were different parts of me holding different episodes. So as I continued on in life and the memories crept into my everyday consciousness of military bases and military men and these awful things happening, I knew that someone was messing with my head, but I didn't know why. And I didn't really know what to call it, at first. So that, it's really hard to pin it down, but I would say that my significant waking up began in my early to mid-30s. But it would be 46 before I actually got help.
Wow. We're just literally scratching the surface, and we're reading some of the comments in the chat room. It's definitely a heavy topic. Elisa, would you be so kind to just hang on the line just for a few minutes while we take care of some business here, and then we'll come back and continue diving deeper into some of these experiences?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Sure. And don't go away, guys. Like I said, we're just scratching the surface here. I know there's a few questions in the chat room that we need to get to. We're going to get to them once we come back from the break. Here we like to, support indie artists and new artists, up-and-coming artists. And this week we actually found a really talented young man, 17 years old, I believe, from right here in LA. An amazing rapper and MC. His music is like a throwback to the old good hip-hop that, a lot of us grew up listening to and enjoy. And he goes by the name of Afro. Go check him out on YouTube. Look up his album. You can download his album for free right now. So give this a listen. If you dig it, go support him. Go check it out. Download it. Enjoy it. And we're going to be right back. This is West of the Rockies. I'm here. Genevieve is here. And our guest tonight is Elisa E, who wrote about her experiences in 2 books entitled Our Life Beyond MKUltra, Book 1 and Book 2. Don't go too far. Enjoy the tunes because we're going to be right back and it's going to get crazy. So enjoy. Here we go.
West of the Rockies with Frank.
What's up, guys? This is Jorge Diaz of Paranormal Activity, The Marked Ones, and you're listening to West of the Rockies with Frank. This portion of the show is sponsored by Haunted Orange County, your premier source for all things haunted in and around OC. From haunted history ghost walks to ghost group hunting expeditions at some of SoCal's most haunted destinations. Make your fall plans early and book an upcoming tour or investigation today. Visit hauntedoc.com.
Open your mind.
And we are back to the second hour of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but it's so far it's a really, really fascinating show. As always, I'm Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook. Don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at WOTR Radio, and check out the website WOTRradio.com, where we have a ton of cool stuff, including this interview will be up there. If you missed any part of the beginning, do not fret. We will have that up there for your listening enjoyment. As always, I'm joined by Genevieve. You can find her on Twitter at Genevieve UWay, and right here every Thursday nights at 9 p.m. hosting her very own show. No added flavors, music, facts, requests, jokes, and a whole lot of fun. Definitely check it out. Check your local listings. I don't know. I just felt like saying that. Our guest tonight is Elisa E, who has authored 2 books titled Our Life Beyond MKUltra, Book 1 and Book 2. And you can check out her website, ourlifebeyondmkultra.wordpress.com. So that's all together, Our Life Beyond MKUltra.wordpress.com. And I'm going to bring Elisa back into the conversation. Elisa, can you hear us okay?
I can. Hi, Frank.
Awesome. And there was a question in the chat by Professor Madness. He wanted to know, what kind of music do you listen to?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, that's transformed a lot over the last few years.
I bet.
I had a lot of music that I was programmed with or to, and then I found that a lot of the music out seemed to reinforce programming that was already in. So now I basically listen to a lot of nature sounds, and really most of it's just very peaceful instrumental.
That's nice. That's nice.
One of the things that I remember reading in your book, speaking of music, was a memory that apparently took place in England. The song Band on the Run by Paul McCartney came on the radio, and I believe it was you that started singing it with different lyrics. Can you tell me a little bit about that episode?
Yeah, it's a partial memory from one of my altars. From what I could tell, and the sense of it was that I was in the UK somewhere, that I was in a city, but maybe perhaps on the outskirts. It was some kind of very manicured park. And the reason I knew I was in that part of the world was, one of the ways I knew was that the steering wheel was on the right-hand side of the car. I was sitting on the left in the passenger seat, and it was a man behind the wheel. We were parked. And I got the impression that it was a very planned episode. So whether it was coming on the radio or he had a tape, I don't know. But it was Paul McCartney's Band on the Run. And in a very, very monotone, very emotionless fashion, my altar began singing part of the chorus, and the part Band on the Run, it became Rent on the Run for me over and over, and he was saying it with me. It was like we were following the song, but we weren't really singing, and we were reinforcing it over and over. And the part of that I understood was that I've lived a life of moving constantly, never having a home base, kind of keeping on the low, working under the table when I can, and so on and so forth. So it was part of my programming to keep me unattached.
I have a quick question. I realize I should have asked this earlier, but for anyone who hasn't read your books, explain why it's called Our Life after MKUltra, or Beyond, sorry.
Oh, sure. Because there's a lot of us that have lived in this body. And the way I see it is that, when an altar presents a memory to me, we've shared the body, but it's truly her experience. I had, until the memory is shown to me, and I do wind up feeling it, reliving it with that altar. But it's at that moment that it becomes part of my life. So it was really her life experience until it becomes our life experience. And there's a lot of us, so I never felt like an I. I've always felt like a we, and so I call it our life.
Okay.
A couple of questions which appeared in a chat before the break. The first one, I've rephrased it a bit. It's related to a query in a chat by PM. To what extent was family involved? You talk about essentially having memories since a baby. What does this make your family? And, what's happening there?
Okay. Well, my whole family's involved as victims first, and in some cases as perpetrators. I want to clarify for myself and anyone else out there, you don't become a perpetrator without becoming a victim first. So in other words, not every victim winds up as a perpetrator, but you can't have a perpetrator really without being victimized by someone somewhere along the way. So I see my family as victims that probably aren't going to get out the way I have, but the work I do will hopefully have some resonant effect. I broke contact with them in the summer of 2000. I don't know. I guess it was closer to the winter of 2008. When I began waking up, we were states apart, but I was still in contact. And interestingly, I began getting phone calls from certain members of my family, and they were saying things that they had never, to my conscious mind, said before, using alter names. I don't believe they knew what they were doing. I honestly don't. I believe that their own programming was kicking in, and there was a real push to get me to come back to the state they were living in. And it was really difficult decision. It took me many months. I thought about it really, really deeply. I feel pangs from it still. This is 7 years now. But I broke contact in a very loving way. Just told them that I was going to get some help, and it would be a while when I knew I probably wouldn't be in contact again, and I haven't been. So as much as I'm sure to their front altar consciousness, they wonder what's the problem, and they're probably angry or disown me by now, but there's they weren't coming out with me.
Wow.
I gave it many, many years of trying to get them to talk about what was happening in our family, and so it was either I go down with the ship or I do something, and hopefully that will have, and I do, I really believe that there's a legacy effect, that if I can break some of the ties, that there's a chance that the future generations may not have to, because we are a multi-generational family of this. There's no doubt about that. So I hope that answers your question.
No, definitely. I mean, in that case, how far back does this go, and how widespread in your family? Is it just your parents? Is it beyond that? Is it cousins as well, etc.?
I believe it goes back a long way. I believe very much in the bloodlines, generational bloodlines, and I believe that I actually believe my parents were brought together. for this reason, whether that's on a, I'm thinking more on a entity level.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the agencies take over at that point. But generationally, on an entity level, I think it goes back a really long way. And when you have a family where, even if it's just one member like me who's used it, as I refer to in the book, at high level, and what I mean by that is that apparently, due to the various agencies and institutions I was at working at a high level, so there was a very concerted effort to design me. And when you have that, there's so much programming and there's so many controls that you cannot reside in a family that isn't completely controlled. And my father was, one of my first programmers. So, I do know there was incest with at least one brother, and I suspect both. I know that my mother on some level was cognizant. She was always trying to protect herself from, any truths that might come out. But I really look at them all as victims.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to be, driven places and taken places. And when I came back all messed up, I had to be taken care of. So I believe that most of the members of my immediate family are multiples as well. And in some cases, I know some of their alters. I've seen them in, full consciousness in my deprogramming. So, when you're talking at this level, the whole family, the immediate family, living in the same house has to be involved, whether they're aware of it or not.
Yeah. You talk about union, specifically entity union. What is meant by this? Could you describe how, perhaps your own experiences or ideas about it?
Yes. My experience tells me this, that you could apply all the programming, meaning they could take you to facilities and they could torture you and they could work you over and they could do all kinds of things to you and program the bejeebies out of you, but without the entities, it wouldn't last. It's not that it wouldn't have an effect, but in my experience, it wouldn't hold and it wouldn't run and you wouldn't be a lifelong subject. So there's the very earthly, four walls and a door and machinery and agencies, but there's a malevolent, very malevolent, significant part to this. That's why I use the term esoteric tech. It's black magic combined with a very hardcore earthly science.
Yeah.
But this is old stuff. This is the stuff that, initiates were put through.
Yeah.
Over the eons probably. So it has a long, long history, which is why there's such a strong, in my opinion, such a strong bloodline. And to answer your question, I could feel myself, running down a divergent there, but to get back to the union, in my case, I have very clear memories, both years ago, while I was being programmed, and also attempts to reinforce this or regain this in deep deprogramming with very particular entities that were basically running me through my, physical, whether you call it CIA or military handlers, but these entities were a significant part of my life, all of my life. And in one case, at 18, I believe it was in my teens, and I believe it was 18 that I was unioned with an entity. And what I mean by that, without going into the description, which I go into great detail in the book, but what happened was what I would call at that point a full possession. There's varying degrees. In my opinion, most people walking around have entities affecting them day in, day out. They have no idea. That's not a possession. It's more of they're on the exterior. They may gain entry. They may be in and out. But a full-on possession is, they're running the show for at least part of several of the altars or one of the altars. I often found that if it was a very strong, high-level entity, they may be running a group of altars.
Yeah.
That was the case with me. You may have a particular entity that's running your kill altars. You may have another very high-level entity, female entity in my case, who I also know was running a lot of the sex altars. So it kind of, but again, it can
and
vary.
Was that Lilith, I believe? Or?
Yes. Yeah, Lilith.
Okay. Yeah.
Lilith, I refer to them as Lilith and Cain. And it doesn't mean that they can't go by other names. I believe they do have other names in other periods of human history. But for me, I know of my two main high-level altars were Lilith and Cain.
In that case, are these entities, are they like demons in a Judeo-Christian sense? Is that just an interpretive way of labeling them? Or what type of things are they?
Well, I mean, I live in a Judeo-Christian society, or I have. I grew up in, I wasn't in a religious family by any means, but it's my point of reference.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, if you want to call Lilith Isis, that's fine with me. I could give her a lot of names. And the same with Cain. There's other names. It depends what period you're talking about. But for me, those names kind of came early on, and that's how I know them. And especially since one of my main altars associated with both of them is named Lily. So, I take that from the Lilith. That's probably where Lily got her name. So there could be other names, and it is a point of reference.
Okay.
Really.
Another question by the same person, Prof. Madness, in the chat. Was there any drug-induced programming? If yes, how does this occur?
Oh yeah, a lot of drugs were used. I don't know all of what was used. Basically, the way I know that drugs were used was either seeing them and or being in in the memory download, being literally in the drug stupor. In several cases, trying to, in the altar as I'm coming to, trying to get through the fog of being drugged, the effect. Both mentally, physically, affecting my vision. And then, again, these were in actual programming sessions. I do not recall in the one I'm thinking of. I don't know how it was put into my body, whether it was injected or something. I really don't have that part of the memory. I come to well into the memory. And then in other cases, in what appear to be some kind of ritual setting, also being drugged.
Wow. A few minutes ago we were talking about Paul McCartney and music, and I've heard a lot of talk about the entertainment industry as there being a lot of people who are under mind control. In your book, you talk about some fragments of memories where you saw somebody that looked like the actor Danny Glover or Christian Bale, and you also talk about using Batman as a method of programming and mind control. Tell us a little bit how TV, movies, music are used in these mind control rituals.
Well, personally, I think that pretty much, aside from a few low-level people breaking into the industry, that the entire industry is mind control. It's one of the most powerful methods of delivery, visually and through sound. And I really believe that if it wasn't begun that way, that it was co-opted very early on to control the masses. And as far as on an individual, I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty elementary at this point. And there's tons of stories to support that, but I think it's far more insidious than most people realize. And I think in this day and age, it's downright dangerous. Streaming can be, there's a lot of stuff that can come through and the technology is there to pump it through. And I mean, there's patents out, and you can go talk to Ron Patton if you want.
Right.
He'll give you a list of them. He's done that. You know, he's actually listed a lot of them. I know Ron, and I mean, these things are very real. It's happening, and in the patents, they'll tell you what it is that can do to you. And so the industry is loaded with it. And you're seeing a lot of stuff is breaking into the news. I mean, with a variety of actors and musicians and, broadcasters both here and abroad that were, all this time were either abusers or victims.
Yeah.
They're coming forward. And for me, I want to clarify for anybody who doesn't read the book, that the Danny Glover episode was actually someone that I was made to believe was him, and we were in a programming scenario, a training scenario, and a program session. And it wasn't actually the actor, but I was being programmed to him as part of what I believe a team. And that, when that first came forward for me, why on earth, would anyone be programming me to Danny Glover? And I would find out with just a very small amount of research that he was and is quite the activist. Oh, wow. Extremely so. And he comes from a family of hardcore activism, and ironically, it turns out Danny Glover was a real thorn in the side of the Bush family. Oh, wow. So when I look at my history and connections, it made perfect sense that there was a plan set. Something that never took place, obviously. And of course, Danny Glover had, at one time, not that long ago, was very supportive of Chavez. Hugo Chavez. So as I researched it, there were real strong possibilities of why that was happening. As far as Christian Bale goes, I don't know if he was actually present. My altar absolutely believes it was him. And this was some years ago when we were both younger. And I was programmed to him in a fashion that suggested a very deep sexual romantic. And subsequently as an adult, I would go to every film that he produced or was starring in. And the Batman theme for me started back in childhood and continued with the Dark Knight series. And there was some really serious programming with that. And I want to say that my programming with that was revealed long before the shooting took place with James Holmes. And I had documented it and shared it with others so that when that story broke, I wasn't the least bit surprised, that it was being used.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, and I'm glad you brought it up because, I obviously we're all familiar with James Holmes and what happened at one of the theaters where this movie was being played. Genevieve?
No, I just had a related question. The question in the chat specifically was, whether you've seen the BBC America show called Orphan Black. And my broader question is, how do movies and TV tie in terms of watching them? And do you still watch things like that?
I do, with full awareness. It's more like a research for me. Because there's a lot coming out in Hollywood and has been for a long time. And yes, I am familiar with Orphan Black, and it does pertain to my particular story. It was a very difficult program to watch, as have been several. I've had to really temper over the years certain things that I watch. But I see these programs in several different ways. They're a revelation of information to an unwitting public. They're an indoctrination system so that, for example, Orphan Black involves cloning. Anybody who comes forward to speak about cloning will be more likely dismissed as fantasy. But also at the same time, they're revealing and indoctrinating everyone. so that you're becoming, you're getting the information, but you're getting it in a way that you don't have to take it as truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're desensitizing you to any truths that could, be revealed by people who are actually having experiences like myself and, many other victims. So, yeah, it's a very, very powerful medium, in my opinion.
Wow.
It's one of the scariest ones out there, quite honestly. But it's a really great way to see, if you're not an insider, you'll see where the agenda is going if you follow some of the newer stuff.
No, it's funny because just a few days ago we watched a movie called MKUltra, which we really didn't know exactly what we watched it because it's like, it's a new movie and we're going to watch it. And all of a sudden this movie turns into a very, and I think we had already the interview with you booked, and I just thought that the timing was a bit eerie.
Because we didn't read the synopsis, we just watched it and we were surprised at the content and how it relates.
Do you think that the studios and some of these executives, actors, are they in on it, or do you think there might be unwilling pawns in all of this? What's your take with just the entertainment industry?
Yeah. No, there's definitely some high level, I could name some of them, who are very witting. Mm-hmm. But truthfully, across the board, whether it's the entertainment industry or it's corporate America or it's military America or it's religions or intelligence agencies or, across the board, most people who are working for them have no idea they're really working for them.
Right.
And there's several reasons why. Lack of information, but, one of the other main reasons is ego. I think a lot of people don't want to have that crushing sensation of their foundation falling out from under them. It's not a pleasant experience, and the ego will rationalize and justify a lot of things to prevent that from happening. So, people will say to me, well, how do I find out about this kind of stuff? Well, the internet is littered with information now. I mean, it's just absolutely everywhere, but you do need to know key phrases to get in there and start accessing the information. So I do think that I just know I can tell there's certain people when I see they come out with something, I will go watch it because I know they're an insider.
Right.
There's no doubt in my mind. And it's just informative in the sense that it helps with my history. It helps me know where they are with things because of what they're trying to bring to the public.
Right.
Like MKUltra.
Right.
What MKUltra did was turn it into I actually did a review of, or assisted someone in a review of that movie for Ron's magazine. A friend of mine, Ilana Freeland, did it, and I gave my bit. And really what I sum it up as is for people who have never heard of MKUltra, they'll go to that movie, and this is the way that the general populace works, is that will be the only information they have on MKUltra. That'll be sufficient. To them, it will be, I kind of know, I saw this movie, and how many people will actually look to see, what it really is about and what's really happened and what is continuing to happen. So to me, MKUltra is a fabulous metaphor for how the industry programs the populace.
In your book, and I highly recommend people grab this book. You can get it on Kindle. You can get a physical copy. If you go to Amazon, we'll be posting the links, and you can also find the links on Elisa's website, Our Life Beyond MKUltra.wordpress.com. She goes into great detail. But I wanted to ask you about something that was really interesting in your book. You know, talking about TV shows. You mentioned watching the first episode of a TV show that dealt with this type of stuff, and that you couldn't watch it for more than, 15 minutes before there were triggers and things that were resonating with you and your alters. And that just got me thinking, because you mentioned that in your early 20s, you began to show signs of what you call program breakdown, and you began to do a lot of self-harming, alcohol and drug abuse and things of that nature. And I just started thinking, is it possible that these TV shows and these movies, kids watch this stuff, and by kids, I mean like teens, late teens, early 20s, and they exhibit some of the same symptoms like suicide attempts, depression, anxiety, anorexia, and all of these things. Do you see any type of a correlation between the program, not necessarily mind control programming, but television programming and movies, etc., having a direct impact on kids? Maybe are they being programmed? Are we being programmed, and we just don't know it when we watch certain TV shows, movies, etc.?
Absolutely. As a friend says, they call it programming for a reason. I mean, they tell us it's programming. Here's the programming. It is. And again, getting back to, thinking in terms of the black on black technology, I'm talking about the way underground, let's take the conservative view that it's only 50 years ahead. We're talking about them sending things, and the patents do exist. Some of the patents exist. You can find them sending things through. They can send it through the physical television. They can send it on streaming. It's really big. So not only is it content, we're talking about what else is being sent through. What frequencies, right. So it's a combination. And I want to just kind of quickly mention this, that, I consider myself an old model. And I was born in the early 60s. And throughout the years, I saw upgrades. In other words, as technology became available, something in me was enhanced or programming changed. But nowadays, I first of all, I don't think trauma-based mind control will ever completely go away, because there's just a lot of sadistic entities running a lot of sadistic people in these families, and they're always they get off on it. Right. So it's always going to be around. But nowadays, they don't have to do that. It's all done remotely. I mean, all of it. So they can pick someone that's already in their 20s. They don't have to mess with. There's hardly any expense, time, energy. The investment is minimal, so everybody becomes expendable.
Wow.
You spend a few months reaching out. You find the right brainwave that tendencies. You lock onto someone. You work them over for a few months, and forgive me, but you've got a James Holmes.
Right.
And when you're done, you wash your hands of it. There's no paper trail. There's no nothing. And this is being done on a frightening scale. All you have to do is watch the newscast, any news. It's every day across the globe. So to me, it's transitioned into something that's even more horrific, because it's so fast compared to what, someone like me costs them. It's inexpensive, and everybody becomes a potential victim, and everybody becomes expendable.
Wow. Your story is so strange, and it's so scary, all the experiences you had to go through. But in the midst of that, you had also a lot of brushes with some really strange paranormal experiences. One in particular that I wanted to ask you about, because there's a series of books written by a former police officer named David Paulides, and he writes these books dealing with mysterious disappearances, people that disappear without a trace, and they're either not seen again, or they find them in strange locations weeks, months, sometimes even years later. And you experience a type of a disappearance. When I was reading your book, you talk about visiting the Andrew Jackson plantation with your mom, I believe, and you disappeared. And what I want to make sure that people understand is that I'm not talking that, you know, you just, somebody lost sight of you for a few minutes. You say that you physically disappeared. Can you tell me about that, please?
Well, from my perspective, it was very paranormal, but the events leading up to it were very strange, both for my mother and for myself. We were actually on a vacation, if you can call it that. Of course, this was when I was still under full programming, and as was she, and there was a lot of strange things that happened. We were up in, again, the Tennessee, North Carolina area. We were revisiting old places, and we had a plane to catch, and we had a few hours, and we went back to the Andrew Jackson plantation. We had gone there when I was younger several times, from what I recall. And so we went through this series of you know, walking. You walk the grounds, and it's a self-guided tour. They give you the headsets. My headset didn't work. So everybody else had headphones on, and I just shut mine off and you know, walked along. But everybody was at their own pace. Right. And basically, without going into all the details, because that would take so long, we were standing in the house waiting there was a little bit of a line to get down the hallway, and I felt my visual field was closing in, and I felt this change happening to me. And I thought I was going to faint. Now, I didn't have a history of fainting, but that was the sensation, and I didn't even really have time to explain to her, but the way I looked, she could tell something was wrong, and I said, I got to go, and I headed for the door. And when this is the way it felt, I burst through the front door. There was an attendant there all dressed in period garb, and they opened the door. And as I exited the house, everything changed for me. I mean, everything looked the same, but I knew something had happened, and I wasn't in the same frame of mind. Everything became hyper sensitive. In other words, the sounds, the clarity of my visual, everything became enhanced. And this is common in programming, you know, when you switch alters and so forth, or when you have these other parallel time. That's the way it becomes. It's very calm and actually very peaceful, but it's difficult to explain, but everything's super sensitive. And I turned around and looked at the big house, and I knew something was completely different, but I was still there in this time, you know, in that year. But I began to notice that not only did I feel different, but there were people coming up the walkway, you know, slowly trickling up the walkway to go into the house, and I began to notice that no one was paying attention to me. Wow. And I mean, not at all. You know, if you stand in one place long enough and people are filing by you, somebody is going to look at you. Right. Someone's going to glance and look away. Nothing. There was nothing. And I began to realize that for whatever reason that I couldn't explain, they couldn't see me. Wow. And then it would be approximately 10 years later, completely unsolicited, and this was when I was waking up, that I was in a location in New Mexico where I worked, and I was at a business, and I was sitting out front, the place that I worked, and the business catty corner across the street. There was a woman that worked there that I was somewhat friends with, but she knew nothing about my history or what was happening to me. Right. And she would tell me one day that she was watching me sitting there very still, and she said I was vibrating, and then I was gone. Yeah. No, that is so strange. Yeah, and then, you know, the next moment I was there in the exact position. And I mean, she told me this completely unsolicited one day, you know, somewhere down the road, and she said she was reluctant, you know, to discuss it with me. Now, I can't explain this other than again, kind of like with the breathing underwater that sounds so crazy, but now they're coming out with, actual science and technology that's going to offer that option to people, claiming that they're going to offer that in the future. They're coming out with a lot of cloaking technologies. This is being revealed on the internet.
Yeah.
That this is already up and running. So, is it a paranormal thing, or is it esoteric tech that was going off for some reason? Was there something else happening? And perhaps this was a continuation of some aspect of my mind control.
Well, reading your book, I was quite overwhelmed. And, this is me just reading it. I can't even begin to imagine having to live through a fraction of this. We're almost out of time, Elisa, but if really quick, you can, because I found this interesting because I've heard it from somebody else before when we were talking about some of the entities that people encounter through astral travel or the use of certain psychedelic and things of that nature. But in your book, you mention an instance wherein you were at a store and one of the young ladies behind the counter, I can't remember if she was the one bagging your purchases, but you mentioned that she was dressed up for Halloween, and there was something about the way she looked that it reminded you of some of the entities that you were familiar with, and later you realized that she was dressed up as the Sith Lord, I think it's called, from one of the recent Star Wars movies. Can you tell me just briefly about that?
Well, that was a really, really horrible night before, and I was still in very bad shape. That day, I was very ill and very dissociated. So I was switching in and out of altars, and so by the time I got to the store, I was in extreme dissociation, which for me is I feel completely detached from anything going on around me, as if I'm in a foreign land. I'm living in, a whole different consciousness. And so I went to the store because I was ill to pick up some herbs to try to alleviate some of my symptoms. And I'm standing there, and it was, I guess it was Halloween. It was. I didn't even remember that day. And I saw her, and I just began to cry. I mean, weep, not sobbing, but as if this person has no idea what she's dressed up as.
Right.
For her, it's just some Halloween costume.
Right.
For me, it's real. It's a whole other existence, and it's running this world. So all that emotion. I had just been through a really horrific night, and there I was looking at this person imitating, innocently imitating, something that's real. So the Sith costume reminds me of the darkness.
I was going to say, if I want to think with the evil villain brain of mine, it would almost seem like it's done on purpose, right? That these pop culture characters become big, people dress up as them, and for all we know, it's just part of the plan to help trigger somebody that's under mind control or have somebody have some kind of reaction, It just is really terrifying. Right.
It reinforces the programming, it reinforces the trauma, it reinforces, and believe me, they're not always look like that. They can look beautiful.
Right.
I mean, like movie star beautiful when they want to. So it really depends on the high-level ones I'm used to, meaning the ones that have these abilities. They can really, depending on what they want to elicit or trigger in me, they can present very, very different forms. And some of them are, with certain altars, are almost irresistible to me. It's a true struggle for the strongest part of me. Not so much anymore, but I mean, as I was waking up, it was a terrible struggle. So it can be hideous and it can be mesmerizing. And I do believe they're very hypnotic.
Wow. Yeah.
So it can go either way. So I tell people, I know most people know what darkness is and know to, stay away from it, but it's the honey. Watch out for the honey. Because they're capturing more and more people with feel good than they are feel bad. Feel bad, most of us will walk away. Some of us don't, but feel good, they'll draw you in. And that's really more their MO on a mass scale than it is the other.
Honestly, that is a very fair warning to put out there. It reminds me of, I was reading a book by a biblical scholar, and they were talking about the incident in the Garden of Eden. And there's always been this debate of how the devil tempting Eve, and was he a snake or what was he? And this particular author was saying that he believed that the devil presented himself in a very beautiful, appealing way to the woman. So I find what you said to be a caution to take to heart.
They'll come to you and offer first. They'll come to you and offer the very thing you want the most, and you may not even know how much you want it.
Wow.
And that is a much easier way to lure someone in. I've met many people who have shared their experience with what came in that form, and these are some pretty exceptional bloodline people, and then they realized what they were dealing with. But that it was presented in a way that was just absolutely charismatic, intelligent, beautiful. And if you think about it, really, even looking in our world and the controlling elite, this is the world they live in. To me, that is the true Luciferic, which is the philanthropists, the cultured, intelligent, their gift to charity. That's where you'll find the Luciferic living. It's the Satanic that is the Sith-looking, in your face, scary, mean. They don't care who knows. The Luciferic is suave. It's incredibly charismatic and hypnotic. So if you look at the elite and their world and the high society, the high level superstars and supermodels and our iconic godlike sports heroes, and their world that's what it is. It's hypnotic and beautiful and filled with carnal pleasure.
I have an unrelated question. What is the real danger of people coming out to stop you, from coming out with this information? Is there a real danger that they will actually do something to you?
Well, early on, those things happened to stop me from continuing on the path. Now, there's always an entity presence, so I continue with my clearing and my protection and staying straight. They've got all the time in the world. That's the way I look at it. They can bombard you as much as they want, but truthfully, I'm not going to get big press. That's what they know. It's when you move into a certain arena and you're talking about certain things and you get a certain level of view where people, then things change. And there's been many that have gone down in that area. But as long as I'm still, pumping self-publish, doing alternative radio, they're just, there's a lot of us doing this. And in my small community, a very small community that I'm living in right now, I have my books in the library. Most people in town have no idea.
Wow.
So as long as it stays that way, you can talk to your blue in the face.
Right.
And my view of it is that if there's anyone out there, because the more people that wake up and the more victims that break free, energetically, the stronger the truth gets. So I'll keep speaking until, I don't have a voice, but Yeah, to me, that's the truth of the situation.
Elisa, one more question before we let you go, and this is from the chat room.
From KP as
yeah,
well.
from KP, I'm looking for... Okay, the question is, how does one know if they're being victimized as a form of mind control? And he's asking this in relation to what happened to you with seeing the young lady in the supermarket dressed up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. As I said, I spent a lot of years. But, self-honesty is critical. Developing your own discernment, not being afraid to step outside of what you think you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's crucial. Having a very strong or developing a very strong inner life, that will fuel all those other things I mentioned. You've got to use your intellect, and you've got to use your spirit. You can't use one or the other. You must educate yourself, but you have to use your heart and your mind to do it. And don't be afraid to find out you don't know what you thought you knew. That's the biggest barrier I see with people, is the fear of letting go of something they believe and have always believed. If you just forge ahead and be willing to learn some of those crushing truths, and I'm speaking from experience. I wouldn't ask anyone to do anything I haven't done 100 times over, and learn those crushing truths. What I can promise you, absolutely promise, money back guarantee, is that on the other side, all kinds of things will be understood, and every time you do it, all kinds of new information you didn't even know existed will come your way. It'll be handed to you.
Wow.
So just forge ahead, and don't be afraid to admit that you didn't know.
Yeah. The books are Our Life Beyond MKUltra by our guest tonight, Elisa E. Check out her website, Our Life Beyond MKUltra.wordpress.com, and I highly encourage people to get her books. Tonight we just talked about book 1, and honestly there is so much more in the book. There's so much more details that I think this was a good introduction for people that maybe haven't checked out the book yet to go check it out. Elisa, what can I say? Thank you so much for your bravery and your courage, and for just staying up with us so late. We really appreciate you sharing these stories that I'm sure that even though time has gone by, it's still not easy to talk about.
No, it's gotten a lot easier, but you're right.
Really?
There's always some kind of effect. But Frank, Genevieve, I really appreciate you inviting me on.
Oh no. Thank you for
so
doing
much.
This.
And hopefully we can have you back on the show, and we can maybe discuss book 2, because I'm sure that's going to be just as engaging and fascinating as the first one.
Yeah, I know that we didn't even get to cover the questions in the chat. Yeah,
but thank you so much.
That'd be great. You let me know.
Absolutely.
Right.
Have a great night. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Good
You
night.
too. Bye-bye.
Wow. What can I say? I mean, I said it at the beginning of the show, and I said it throughout the show. This topic is really, it's one of those topics that you keep digging, and it just gets crazier and darker the deeper you go. Genevieve, give me some comments here.
Too many comments, but top of my head, what I like about this information is that instead of fragmenting the paranormal, as it were, and I mean everything that falls into the paranormal field, like whether it's UFOs, whether it's ghosts, whether it's Sasquatches or whatever,
astral travel,
everything,
parallel dimensions.
But what this does is it links it all to one core idea, which makes you start questioning whether, when people are experiencing certain things, seeing these things, maybe they're not seeing different things or experiencing different things. Maybe it's just one thing leading to different manifestations. So, I mean, it makes sense. Why would there be so many weird things out there in the world when Occam's razor would have it that there's only one weird thing, but people see it in different ways and it can appear in different ways? That starts making sense.
Yeah, it's funny because lately, through our research and as we prepare topics for this show, it seems like we're coming up against the idea that somehow all this phenomena, all this separate phenomena is connected somehow. That's what it seems like. It's really, scary and fascinating for me, exploring this possibility that it could be all
But again,
tied in
like
together.
I said, it would make more sense than, you know, people in Asia believing in this and people here believing in this, and they all experience different things, and they all have their own demons and experiences. You know, maybe they're not. Maybe they're not seeing something different.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more about Elisa and her experiences, and honestly learn more of how some of these methods are being applied today.
Even if you've, it's good because it's also available as an ebook. So
and
if you
they
don't
have the
hang
Kindle
around,
option, right? And you can get the hard copy as well.
Yeah.
You can find them on Amazon. We'll be linking to those on our website. You know, don't forget to check out her website, which is, again, Our Life Beyond MKUltra.wordpress.com. You can see her collages. For the people that were on Ustream, they got a chance to see them there flashing in front of their screen. And you can learn, like I said, more about Elisa. And definitely, I recommend getting the books. They're a few bucks, and the information in them, it's definitely well, you know, worth, you know, more than what you pay for. So again, I encourage people to check it out. Our Life Beyond MKUltra, Book 1 and Book 2. That being said, I'm sitting here literally at the edge of my seat. I need to go have a drink and relax for a minute, let all this stuff marinate in my brain a bit.
Oh, there's so much we didn't even talk about.
Oh, no, believe me, I had a million questions. You can see here, I literally wrote another book of questions for Elisa. We're going to try to have her back and talk about Book 2 because I know that's going to be another big one. But for tonight, I'll have to bid farewell to everyone. It's that time again. We went over a few minutes, but that's what happens when you have a guest that it's amazing and just
over more than a few minutes.
So take care, be safe, God bless. Don't do anything too crazy. Want to see you back next week.
Thanks
if you
for
missed
the questions.
Yeah, the questions were great. Big shout out to everybody in the chat room, everybody that listened to us on iHeart, and if you're catching this as a podcast, hello to you as well.
Total shout out to Prof Madness and Kung Pu for they came out with some great questions.
There's some really good stuff. As always, Genevieve Uway on Twitter, and you can find her here every Thursday night, 9 p.m., hosting No Added Flavors, fun. I was trying to say fun and jokes, and somehow I got phone.
So you could have fun, folks.
Jokes, facts, and taking your music requests. So definitely check it out. As always, Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook. Check out the website, WTRradio.com, and follow the show on Twitter, WTR Radio. I'm going to go out with a song that it's a little long, but it's really intriguing.
This is some pretty wild stuff. Potentially related stuff.
Exactly. Hence why I have it here. If you haven't seen this video, well, listen to the song first and then go check it out. But this is the brand new track by David Bowie called Black Star.
You need to see the video.
Part of me feels like David Bowie has done it all, and it's like now, you know how people play with like chord progressions and key signatures and key changes?
He could pluck a string and it'll be fine.
Yeah, but it's almost like he's gotten to the level where he needs to compose using music genres into his music. Like he brings this genre and this genre and this genre, and he it's almost like a throwback to 70s David Bowie, which we all love. I mean, he's an innovator in many ways. But check out this track. It's called Black Star. It's really creepy, really crazy. Check out the video as well. But we're going to go out with that. See you next week, guys. Take it easy.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good time. Bye-bye.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.